The state of football. Welcome back. Your new home for real football talk in the morning. I am RIC and the place to be, Ric Serritella, telling it like it is when it comes to the NFL draft and everything football. That's what we do here on the state of football, along with my co-host, John Murphy, down in New Orleans, the VP and player personnel at Toronto Argonauts, joining us here each and every day as we do. Weekdays, 9 a.m. Eastern. Don't forget about our new show, the NFL Draft Tailgate Party, Saturday mornings, 10 a.m., new pregame with the NFL Draft Slant. And, of course, it's all brought to you by the NFLDraftBible.com. Make sure you log on, get our 2021 virtual draft guide available right now, over 300 scouting reports, and we are adding to that daily. Oh, by the way, you'll get a free copy of Scout Speak by Neil Stratton of Inside the League, who we'll have on here at 9:40 a.m. Eastern, and 50% of all sales this week going to the Red Cross Hurricane Delta Relief Fund. So make a contribution, be a good soldier, be a disciple of the NFL Draft Bible. What up, all my chat room people? Charlie, I'm better than you in the chat room already. We are on Periscope, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. If you're in the chat room, you have a question, drop us a line, drop us a comment. We will definitely get to it. We also have Rick Gosselin coming up at 9:20 a.m., a legend in the industry. Of course, Dallas Morning News for about 30 years or so. Bob McCann Award, a NFL Hall of Fame voter. We'll talk a little bit about Fred Dean. We'll talk a little bit about those legendary mock drafts and big boards he used to compile as well. And, of course, now doing the Talk of Fame rodeo. But, hey, John, we start off with the NFL. We've got some breaking news here on the Le'Veon Bell situation, obviously being released from the New York Jets. Several suitors in the mix. What's the scoop, my man?
Well, I was hoping that he would have just called Tom Brady and asked him to, throw him a buoy, pull him on board down there. Especially the way that Ronald Jones has not been catching passes with his hands, in recent weeks. But it seems like you're correct. He's going to have no less than anyone that's playoff bound, being interested in him. At the end of the day, it does seem like the Kansas City Chiefs are going to be very much in the mix. So the rich could get richer in the sense of the Jets would be paying the freight, and most likely you would just be paying a vet minimum because it'll come down to if he thinks that, the best opportunity to play, what's the best role, and what's going to rehab, like how much attention are he and his agent paying to the factor that there is some rehabilitation here in terms of, like character, locker room guy, some of the little antics that have gone on, whether it's the stuff with Pittsburgh at the end of his career there, the couple of things between the coach and the he said, she said, and even the Jamal Adams, type stuff. So you don't want to go too far off, center here when that happens, because we see a guy like Earl Thomas and all the injuries that are happening, and he's still sitting. And it's really got nothing to do with football and everything to do with, can I trust that guy with my players in our locker room not to go sideways? Le'Veon Bell's nowhere near that at the moment, but you don't want to take any steps kind of in that direction right now. So I think Kansas City makes a lot of sense because of Andy Reid. You're going to get him used the right way. I mean, you can only imagine Tyreek Hill, Sammy Watkins, Travis Kelce, Hilaire, and then, doing something with a Le'Veon Bell would seem to make the rich get richer. And after you saw last week against the Raiders, maybe something new, maybe, adding something, the year after winning a Super Bowl and kind of creating a little stir, amongst your guys in a positive way. You would think that would be something that would add another dimension to an already explosive offense. And like I said, you're playing with Mahomes, doing the running, blocking, catching, being that guy, and just kind of putting your head down and playing football the rest of the year could lead Le'Veon Bell, to another long-term deal, which is what he would look for. I think long-term, I think he likes Miami, trains down there, spends a lot of time down there. They would be a team that would be, potentially in the mix. I think the Bills could be a dark horse team. I know people would say they've drafted Singletary and Moss. Okay, but, let's be real. Le'Veon Bell is a whole other animal, compared to Singletary and Moss. And the other day you saw against a tough Titans team, at a really crucial part of the game, it was basically 2 yards a carry for the Bills outside of Josh Allen, would also be a really nice weapon addition, to there. So you could say if he went to the Bills or the Chiefs, he starts kind of sliding the momentum, in those teams' favors. NFC, I think a wild card team to me would be the Bears. They have money to spend. They need another guy with Cohen, being out of the mix. It's not really a Bears type thing. And it may not be a thing where Le'Veon Bell might not see playing 2 months in the cold, even though he was just with the Jets and with the Steelers. Not sure if he'll think that's the perfect fit. But to me, the Bears would be a kind of a dark horse, team in the NFC if you were looking for somebody that might be looking at make an addition, and a guy like Bell here goes to the right team. He might really, be able to put himself back in the mix, for a good contract after this season.
Interesting stuff here from John Murphy, obviously well connected on the inside. And, I think it would benefit him to go to one of the teams with one of the stronger personality head coaches as a Bruce Arians in Tampa Bay, or, Andy Reid, obviously in Kansas City, even Flores down there in Miami. You know what you're getting. And I think he'll toe the line. But I think, if he goes to a team like Chicago or, one of these other teams where, is he really there for the team or is he there for himself? Because if he goes to Chicago and they start losing, they look good right now, but what happens when they go from 4-1 to 6-6? Is he really going to be in it to win it? And that's my concern with Le'Veon Bell. Is he better than, what the Bills have? Yes and no. I mean, he's got 245 carries over the last 3 years. He's pretty much been a shell of himself. Now, if you're getting the Le'Veon Bell from 4 years ago that can really inject some momentum during the second half of the season, well, then I think everybody wins, right? Because part of it is kind of rehabbing the image, right? Here in New York, he was more worried about promoting his rap albums, going on social media, acting like a kid. Is he going to really be a man and grow up? And, I also don't know, does he listen to the people he needs to be listening to? Because he left $45 million on the table with Pittsburgh. He still got his money. Yes, $28 million, I think, over the last 2 years with the Jets. Highway robbery there. But essentially, he left $15-20 million on the table, right? And so part of me says, yes, if he goes to Tampa Bay and is a backup, is a good soldier, Arians and Brady vouch for him after the season, it definitely helps. But I also think the other part of the equation here, I want to see some production. There's no more excuses, hey, I was misused. You go somewhere else and we don't see you produce, I think that's where teams get leery. Now, my follow-up question, John, is, is it strictly one-year deals? Is there a possibility that he can get a multi-year deal?
I think in the right situation, even if it's not what's on the table, I think that's where teams would get leery, right now is, if you had something on the table, it's not going to be guaranteed in any way, so other, because they're not going to want the injury, aspect of that. Cause that's what held up any trade, right? Was not the money this year. But if you made a trade for him and he got injured, you'll be up against it for $8 million. So now obviously it's not going to be $8 million, next year. That would be on the line. So I think it's more of there is a possibility with certain teams to make it a long-term thing. Kansas City would probably not be one of those. Kansas City, I think, would be, best place, best role. I'm in the eye, we're playing important games. It keeps my name and reputation, kind of out in the mix. And, if I can play and play a good role, on a team like that, again, the other thing it does is it makes his production stand out without him having to touch the ball 25 times, right? So you give them and give the audience and give everybody a piece of what they want. But I'm also now 28, 29, but at least I'm not going out there risking the chance that somebody's turning their whole offense over to me and I could have a stumble, right? In a situation like Kansas City, I'm being used in a package. I'm being used in a role. That role may increase in certain games, but you see how, Andy Reid is, a default Bill Belichick, where he will ruin your fantasy football team's week, by, changing it up and using somebody else. So, to me, that's the best match, is Kansas City. But I think there's some teams that see him as a guy that could help, just kind of give them an extra, push there, in terms of down the stretch. And then the long-term situation, like I said, I think Miami is going to be really in the mix, when it comes to the long haul. As long as they feel comfortable, how will he be? What will it be like when he's in there with a Tua, and their younger players? That's kind of have to be the massaging point of the rest of the way. But you have to admit, I mean, Adisa Bakari and those guys have had him several really good opportunities. And whether you like it or not, and like some of the decisions or not, he has still made the most bang for his buck at that position as much as anybody.
Well, tomorrow I'll have my NFL power rankings. We'll see where Le'Veon Bell lands and if that affects where I put the Chiefs, because that would be something else. Charlie in the chat room wants to know, what about the 49ers in Kyle Shanahan's offense? Yeah, I think it would be an extremely terrific fit, but I'm seeing the quotes already coming out of Kyle Shanahan. He was asked about it yesterday, said, hey, I'm good with our guys.
Yeah, and the Mostert thing, if you had lost Mostert and you had Tevin Coleman, now I think it would have made a little more sense philosophically, there. Now, so still a good football player, but I think that, really they want to try to they've invested now in Mostert to see what he is, and you have McKinnon back. Not saying that Bell can't go in there and be a good fit. To me, if they're going to do something, as crazy as it sounds, with the missing parts that they have, they need a Carlos Dunlop, right? They need to go get themselves another guy up front to try to slow down the offenses in their division, because right now they're not able to play the way they did, right? You traded Buckner. I know you got Kinlaw, who I was extremely high on, as a top 15 pick in the draft, but he is a rookie versus a guy like Buckner. You have the issues that you've had, the injuries that you suffered early in the season, and your backups, are not really, able to do it. Then you sign Ziggy Ansah, and all he does is get hurt, after you sign him. So to me, if they're looking to make an addition, that's probably more of a defensive player. If they're going to spend money, that's where they would need to go at it, because you just saw Arizona lose their best pass rusher. The Niners have lost their best pass rusher. The Rams have the best pass rusher in the division, if not the league, in Aaron Donald, and Seattle's looking for pass rushers. So that's kind of the chemical, balance there, right? If somebody can come up with the right solution for creating a pass rush in that division, that's the only way you're going to chase down, literally chase down Russell Wilson and their 5-0 start.
Yeah, final thing on the Le'Veon Bell situation. I did see Matt Nagy asked about it yesterday, left the door open there, said, hey, it's on the table. So there you have it, the Le'Veon Bell situation. As John was talking, more breaking news coming down the wire. 4 members of the Atlanta Falcons organization test positive for COVID. Facilities have been shut down. We will continue to monitor this situation throughout the show, but we're going to pop up our first guest of the day. He's a legend in the industry. We're honored to have him on our show. Rick Gosselin, of course, longtime writer for the Dallas Morning News, Bob McCann Award winner, NFL Hall of Fame voter. The accolades go on and on, of course, now with the Talk of Fame, hosted on Sports Illustrated. Rick, good morning. Welcome to the show.
It's great to be with you guys.
Well,
Glad you finally invited me.
Yeah, hey, we appreciate it, man. And unfortunately, we probably won't have you here long enough, because you're somebody that I would probably like to talk football with all day. But I'll start off with the NFL losing some royalty with the passing of Fred Dean, unfortunately, due to COVID pandemic. Another great legend lost in the NFL community. Take us back on your thoughts of Fred Dean.
Yeah, you guys were just talking about pass rushers. I mean, this guy was elite. When the Niners won that 94 Super Bowl, they traded for him, and he had the same impact that Charles Haley had in Dallas in 92 when they acquired him. I mean, that's the game right now. The game's all about pass rushers. There are a lot of teams right now who wish they had a Fred Dean. He was intense, and he was unblockable when he decided didn't want to be blocked.
Yeah, ironically, John, you just mentioned Fred Dean the other day with the Charles Haley comparison.
Yeah, he's from down here in Louisiana. That's where he was born and raised. Also mentioned he kind of went his own way. A lot of people thought he would go to the SWAC. Instead, he kind of did his own thing. And the story that I mentioned was, that the Niners had, Fred Dean, for a short period of time. And that's who Bill Walsh said, this is what I want. I want to find the next Fred Dean. I want to find a guy with these kind of traits, and sent his scouts off, saying like, hey, look at these 3 traits. The guy that he resembles is Fred Dean. Go find me a guy in college football like that. They brought him back 3 guys. He watched 2 of them, said, yeah, that's not what I'm looking for. And the 3rd guy was Charles Haley. And it was just the manipulation of getting Haley at the right time of the draft, which Bill Walsh was as good as anybody's ever been in that way. So it's a big loss. He was a great person. On top of it, from all the people, like I said, he's originally from down here in Louisiana. So a great person on top of it, and kind of sad, very sad to see it. Only 68 years old, right? Yeah. So we're seeing the impact of this kind of stuff. COVID has no picking and choosing on the people that it affects.
Yeah, very unfortunate. Our thoughts and prayers out to the Dean family. Of course, Rick Gosselin, along with Ric Serritella and John Murphy here. Rick, let me take you back to the Dallas Morning News days, because you were one of the best in the business for a long time. And I know in the NFL draft community, you were also very well respected to the point where you had teams calling you on draft day to say, hey, what's the guys, who's the best available? What's your board looking like? Explain to us, how did you build a network like that where teams were calling you and relying on your information? I find it a little bit harder, I think, in today's modern media world to develop those kind of relationships, but maybe I'm mistaken.
Yeah, you can't. It was a unique situation back in 1992 when they moved me off the Cowboys to the NFL beat. The sports editor, Dave Smith, told me, I want you to grade drafts. I thought, well, if I'm going to grade drafts, I ought to know what the heck I'm talking about. So every year, as the NFL writer, I'd go to probably 10, 15, as many as 18 training camps. I talked to coaches and general managers and owners, and developed a pretty good network over the years. You do this for 20 years, you meet everybody. When I started doing the draft, I started calling my people, my assistant coaches I knew, scouts that I knew, personnel directors, head coaches. And that was probably an initial list. I probably had 50 names on it. And by the end, I did it for 20 years. By the end of it, I had over 200 names I was talking to. My feeling was, I'm a writer. I'm not a scout. I can't watch tape and tell you this guy's a first runner, this guy's a third runner. So I talked to the people that did evaluate players, that did scout players, that did draft players. And they were very honest with me. And they knew that if they told me something, it was going to stay with me. So everybody knew I talked to all 32 teams, but no one knew who individually I talked to. And it got to a point where one GM told me, they considered my board the 33rd board because it was the consensus board. I was talking to all the teams. And as you sift through the different position boards, I talked to a head coach or a GM or a scout, and the conversation would last an hour and a half. I'd go through the top 15 in each position. And they say, well, you got this guy too high, this guy too low. You do this over a course of 8 weeks, you're pretty good, get a pretty good feeling of how the board's going to stack up. So my top 100 board was pretty good. The mock drafts are pretty good. It was a lot of fun. I really, that's probably the most fun I've had in sports writing, is doing that draft.
Unbelievable stuff. Yeah, obviously here at the NFL Draft Bible, we're into all that. And, John, any follow-ups from, the draft before we move on to Hall of Fame talk? We only got Rick for a few minutes here, but a lot of great stories here.
Well, the question is, do we want a fun story or do we want to ask him something serious? Because I do remember as a young guy in the business that the one person that John Clayton once told me at the combine, right? Everybody had their place, right? Everybody sat where they sat. Everybody had their roles because they knew where to be and what they had to do or not to do. So John Clayton is on the opposite corner, across, and all the people that they would want to get introduced to, they would kind of have them there. We all know how Gil Brandt, who's kind of the godfather, of the draft. Well, he literally acted like the godfather of the draft at the combine, where if you rubbed Gil the wrong way, you might not get access, the way that you wanted it, to things. But I think the funniest part was as a young person who, hey, you learn what people know or what they don't know once you get to meet them and kind of, see how they do things. So it was very funny that at one time, as a joke, John Clayton said to me, "Oh, hey, who would really be interested in your mock draft is Rick Gosselin over there," which he knew that couldn't have been further from the truth. And I'm all excited. And I literally walked from the one side of the combine tables that were lined up in the RCA Dome straight across. And you were sitting in the area kind of around Marvez and Shireen and stuff, and I'm all giddy as I go across, and I hand it, he looks and he's like, thanks, puts it down, goes back to what he was doing.
I never looked at anybody else's mock draft.
Right. And John Clayton, who is very, you wouldn't know it by seeing him on TV, but personality behind the camera is very, very different and a wicked sense of humor. I turn back and I look at him and he's just laughing. And I walked back and I said, "You knew that was going to happen." And he said, "Yeah, but you got to get used to things like that and not take it personally so that you go back the next time and you can now start a conversation with the person because they'll have a little bit of memory." And he goes, he doesn't know that you did it as a joke. He may actually look at it and say, wow, like for somebody to come to me and hand me something when I do the amount of work that I do, he's got to trust that if I look at it, I'm not going to look at it and go, my God, what the hell is this guy thinking and stuff. So that's my funny story of interest, just meeting it and doing it. But the real question is, what do you finally think of Drew Pearson kind of getting his due?
It's a long time coming. I'm not sure how he slipped through the cracks. I think the number is 93%, 94% of all first-team all-decade guys are in the Hall of Fame. And he was one of the 7 that wasn't in, and he had never even been a finalist. Cliff Harris got in the Centennial class, but he was a finalist once. And for Drew Pearson to be picked first-team all-decade and never once be discussed as a finalist, and until you're a finalist, you're not a candidate. I mean, that was wrong. I thought he was going to get in the Centennial class, but they picked Harold Carmichael, who was a second-team all-decade guy. So it was a long time coming. I kept telling Drew, I said, look, I firmly believe there are holes in this process, but if you truly belong in the Hall of Fame, eventually you're going to get there. It may take you 20 years. It may take you 30, 40-some like Jerry Kramer, 50-some like Jack Butler. But if you belong in the Hall of Fame, you're going to get there. And I think Drew, he's not in yet. There's still going to be a vote in February. But now that he's a finalist, I like his chances.
Let's take it to that, let's pretend like he's not part of the equation. Is there a guy in your mind that now fits that bill next if it's not Drew Pearson?
You talking about a first-team all-decade guy or just
or just somebody that you see that maybe hasn't gotten the push, that might be in your mind underrated that has Hall of Fame, credentials?
Yeah, George Coons. You know who he is?
Yes, sir.
Offensive tackle. He was second overall pick of his draft in 1969. Walk-in starter with the Falcons. He played 11 seasons. 8 of them, he was completely healthy, and he went to 8 Pro Bowls. He was traded by the Falcons to the Colts in the deal that got Steve Bartkowski in the number 1 pick. Goes to the AFC with the Colts, and boom, he's a Pro Bowler first year. He's never been discussed. He went to more Pro Bowls in the 1970 decade than all 4 of the all-decade tackles in the 70s. And how this guy slipped through I know how he slipped through the cracks. He's an offensive lineman. There are no stats. He didn't win a championship. It's like 69% of all players in Canton won championships. And that's why you see 11 Packers, 11 Steelers, and all these teams all these championship teams getting players. If you were an offensive lineman and didn't have championships, you were really up against it. Ed Buddy's another good example. Ed Buddy was picked the all-time all-AFL team. He went to 8 Pro Bowls. Billy Shaw got in. The other guard in that all-AFL team got in as a senior candidate, but Buddy has never been discussed. And that's one of my pet peeves with the process. In the 1960s, there were 24 first-team all-decade NFL players. 23 of them are enshrined in the Hall of Fame. There were 22 all AFL first teamers, 10 are in. At the end of the decade, those two leagues are playing on equal footing. You get guys like Ed Buddy, I think Houston Antwine is deserving, Tom Sestak, defensive tackle. I mean, these guys have never been discussed and probably never will be discussed. I mean, the farther we get away from those guys who played in the 50s and 60s and 70s, it's going to get tougher and tougher to get in because there's now a rush to get all the new guys in. There's a big push to get Joe Klecko in, who just became eligible. Well, then you're skipping over. Leroy Glover was an all-decade player, and was Klecko better than Glover? Yet there's a push for Klecko and not for Glover. Glover again didn't win a championship.
We're talking to Rick Gosselin here, of course, who has a Hall of Fame vote. So, Rick, take me through the process then, because I was under the impression that you guys do sit around and state cases for folks. So is it only the guys that get voted to the finalists? Are those the only guys that you discuss?
That's the only time we discuss candidates is we're in the room talking about those 15 players. We don't talk about any other players. I would like to see us have a second meeting in June, a non-voting meeting, 2 days. Bring in everybody. All the guys you want to talk about, let's talk about them. Let's get a pecking order. Let's make sure that the right guys get on the list to get voted on. Ken Riley, the guy has never been a finalist. He intercepted 65 passes, second most among all peer corners behind Night Train Lane. How do you intercept 65 passes and never once you get discussed as a Hall of Fame candidate? Ken Riley's been close the last couple of years as a senior candidate, but that's an omission that needs to be addressed. The Hall of Fame isn't supposed to be based on reputation. It's supposed to be based on production. He's the second most productive corner in history. He led the league in interceptions twice. He had 9 to lead the league as a 36-year-old before he retired. This was a great player that hasn't gotten his just due. Another corner, Everson Walls. He's the only cornerback to lead the NFL in interceptions 3 times. The only other player that's done it is Ed Reed. He's got as many interceptions as Mel Blount. He's got more than Deion Sanders, Darrell Green, Champ Bailey. And he got into the room one time to be discussed in his 25th and final year as a candidate. When I sent a letter out saying, you ought to consider this guy. Now he's in the senior pool. And if you're in the senior pool, you're a long shot. There are 60 all-decade players in the senior pool. There are NFL MVPs. There's all 50th anniversary team players in there. It's tough. And now the Hall has rolled it back, and they're allowing us to bring out one senior each year for the next 5 years. That's not enough. I would like to see us do a second centennial class, and this time put in 20 seniors. I've got a list of 80 seniors I think deserve to be discussed. Maybe are they Hall of Famers? Who knows? But let's discuss them. Let's talk about their candidacies and figure out if they're Hall of Famers.
I got David Baker on speed dial right after the show. We're gonna call him up. I think we could make this a made-for-TV event, Rick. I think people to just be a fly on the wall and listen to all the knowledge individuals like yourself are educating us with.
We need to discuss a lot more players than we are. My problem is we don't cycle enough people through the room. Too many people wind up in the senior pool without ever being discussed. I don't know how Randy Gradishar got in that pool, but he's in that pool. Chuck Howley, I'm not sure how he got in that pool. He's in the senior pool. And they're all just lavishing because bringing out one a year, you're never going to dent the logjam.
Well, I'm looking at the one position here now that has a logjam, and you guys are really in a bind because I see Calvin Johnson now is a first-year eligible, but he's going to have to take a ticket and wait in line, I think, because you've got Reggie Wayne, Torrey Holt, Hines Ward. I mean, now Calvin Johnson. How do you kind of see that pecking order or process working out?
Well, this same type of deals we had about 5 or 6 years ago when we had Tim Brown, Chris Carter. We had 3 or 4 receivers, and they'd all knock each other out. Andre Reed was in there. In the first cut, I remember one year we're talking 15 finalists. We had 4 receivers in the finals, and they all got knocked out in the first cut, down to 10 because they all had their own little camps. They all had their portion of the vote, and that's what's going to happen here. I think. I think Calvin Johnson was probably certainly the most dynamic of the group, but the shorter career of the 9 years, they're already talking about that. I'm not sure he's going to be a first ballot guy. There are so many. I mean, Peyton Manning, Charles Woodson. There are a lot of great first ballot, and there are a lot of great candidates in the pool right now. Alan Faneca should have got in probably 3 or 4 years ago. He's still sitting there. It's a tough process. And what we found out as voters is no matter what 5 you pick, it's the wrong 5 the day after. Everybody's complaining about their guy not getting in. And I was on the NFL Network one time and asked one of the players, okay, who would you take out? You want to put your guy in? Who comes out? Well, there was no answer. It's impossible to pick a bad class, but it seems like every year we pick the wrong class.
Definitely a tough job. I think you guys do an exceptional job considering the criteria. As you say, you just get together one time a year. It's a long day. It's a lot of information and a lot of tough decisions. John, we're winding down. Final question here for Rick.
Is Henry Ellard in that group of 80?
He should be.
Okay, good.
And Henry Ellard's the guy. I think Charlie Hennigan from the AFL days is a guy. Stanley Morgan, New England. Look at his numbers. I mean, he was dynamic. You're still going to have Cliff Branch in that group. There's some talk about Otis Taylor of Kansas City. There are so many great receivers in the senior pool and so many great receivers in the current pool. You could put in a class of 5 wide receivers and make no apologies. I could come out with a senior class of 5 receivers and make no apologies. That's a position, and it's going to get tougher and tougher to get in as the numbers become more and more inflated.
I was looking at Henry Ellard numbers this morning. I mean, he had an 8-year stretch where he was as good as anybody. I mean, this guy was putting up 1,400 plus receiving yards in 1984. Can you imagine in today's NFL with the rules today? I mean, he would be approaching 2,000-yard type of season. So it is a really tough decision. We applaud everything that you have done and continue to do. Of course, with the Talk of Fame, Rick, tell people about the programs you have going on, where they can find you, and some of the things you got going on with the Talk of Fame network.
Yeah, the 3 of us, 3 Hall of Fame voters, Clark Judge, Ron Borges, myself, put together this network. We had a national radio show for 5 years. We still have our website up and running. And we've done 309 state your cases. We've looked at 309 players, coaches, general managers, owners, whoever, and say why they should be discussed. Of the 309, 50 have since been enshrined in the Hall of Fame. But it's a good library. If you ever have a name, we've done Henry Ellard, we've done Stanley Morgan. If you think a guy belongs in the Hall of Fame, Google his name on Talk of Fame Network, and you'll find a story telling you why he deserves to be discussed.
Outstanding stuff. Hey, Rick, let's do this again sometime. We would love to pop you back on here and talk some football with you. And, you've got my information now, so please do keep the lines of communication open. We appreciate the time here on the State of Football.
Oh, I appreciate it, and I look forward to doing it again.
Awesome. Great stuff out of Rick Gosselin, a legend in the business. And we go from Rick Gosselin right into our next guest, Neil Stratton, who's en route to a college visit, but not the kind of college visits that we're used to, is it, Neil? How are you this morning?
I'm good, Rick. Honored to be on here. And, man, I got to tell you, Rick Gosselin is a real titan in this industry. And I remember when I first started going to the Combine 20 years ago, some of the questions always so insightful, and it was clear that he had homework.
Yeah, no, he is a titan in the industry, and we just got some very good stories. And sorry that we only had him on for 20 minutes because I could probably talk 20 hours with him. But we always love having Neil Stratton on too, Inside the League. Of course, his new book, Scout Speak. In addition to moving the chains, if you're in the NFL industry, if you work in the business, if you aspire to work in the business, if you want to learn about the NFL draft process, make sure you go check those out on Amazon. Of course, NFLDraftBible.com all access membership will give you a free copy of the book Scout Speak, so make sure you get on that. Neil, a lot of moving and shaking this week. We saw some more underclassmen declare for the draft, who's opting in, who's opting out. You do an incredible job over at InsideTheLeague.com. Of course, the blog Succeed in Football. But your Friday newsletter, I cannot wait until it hits my inbox every Friday evening. it comes down the wire, and Friday I don't get bombarded with emails on Friday like I do the rest of the week. So it's like perfect timing, sweet landing. What are the people going to find in that email blast today or tomorrow?
Well, tomorrow I think we're going to continue our study of the GM profile. We're getting more and more opening. Obviously, the Falcons made a change in addition to the Texans. So we'll talk more about what the modern GM looks like, who's getting hired, what their pedigree looks like, those kinds of things. It's important to know kind of what owners want to do and what the trends are. And, if you kind of have a little bit of homework and do a little homework on that kind of thing, you kind of can know why teams succeed and why teams fail, and which ones kind of have the culture that helps them win and which ones don't. So we'll look more in depth at that. We'll kind of continue that conversation that we had last week on.
Yeah, we had some of those conversations here throughout the week, especially when it comes to the Atlanta Falcons and Houston Texans openings. The owner could play a big factor in terms of the quality of GM that you're able to that wants to come to your team, right? And I think the other thing too, I'm interested to see is, like, I've seen this trend now where you've got younger and younger GMs, and in fact, GMs that based on 10, 20 years ago wouldn't even be qualified to be a GM.
Such a good point. And, I'll tell you what else is interesting to me. I had a chance this summer to do some sessions with former GMs, and they talked about how they got hired and what owners are looking for. And it's really interesting. You kind of have to go into the DNA of these owners. What's their background? What kind of business did they run? To know kind of what they're looking for. A lot of these guys came from real estate and certain kind of person they're looking for when they're hired. Some are kind of old school owners who've always owned the team and it's gone down through the family. It's not as much about money as it is about the game, and they're looking for a certain thing. It's just the vagaries of the interview process and the actual personalities of each of these owners really has an impact on the selection process. One story that I heard was Win Thomas, the Atlanta Falcons GM, whose last name is escaping me right now. When he was hired, he wasn't expected to be hired. That was done as a favor to Robert Kraft. And so when Arthur Blank had him on and interviewed him, it went from what was going to be a 15-minute courtesy interview to like a 2-hour, essentially, coronation of him. And so it's just really interesting how this whole process works, how it goes on behind the scenes. If you're interested in what happens behind the scenes, come check out our Friday wrap. Check out our blog, Succeed in Football. Hopefully, if you haven't already picked up our book, Scout Speak, I think there's a lot of that in there as well. And Rick, you've been really good to help me promote that and give out copies of that as well.
Yeah, no doubt. InsideTheLeague.com. Get on it. It's an invaluable resource. We're talking with Neil Stratton at Inside the League, CEO, founder, owner, along with John Murphy. What do you got for Neil, John?
So I was mentioning to the last couple of guests that have watched the first part of the college football season, which is kind of interesting that we've now got multiple parts of it that we're going to watch throughout the course of the year. Is there a team in your mind when the Big 10 start, Pac-12 start, MAC starts? Is there a team or a player to you that could have the kind of metamorphosis the way North Carolina has, the way Travis Wilson, has? Is there a team in the Big Ten or a player in the Big Ten or Pac-12 that you see making a big impact on the second half of what we're going to see this fall?
Boy, that's a good question. There's still so much to be played out. I will say this. I think kind of going the other direction, you talked about a team. USC has really been hit by some of the opt-outs, and I don't know how that's going to affect their chemistry. Some of these guys would come in and come out, and they're kind of on the fence and that kind of thing. And it's going to be interesting to see how all that works out. This season is so unique, and obviously initially made the decision not to play, and now they're coming back. I don't know how that's going to affect chemistry. And again, if we're talking about what's going on behind the scenes, I mean that does have an impact. So will that kind of ruin the way the flow and the way the teams work? I don't know. I mean, I think it's kind of one of the things to look for, though, as college and pro football fans, because there's so many factors that go into success. and it's not nearly as easy as just looking at who your stars are. So I guess that's something I'll kind of be monitoring. I guess we'll know a little bit more about that here in a few weeks when the Big Ten's up and running and the Pac-12 as well.
Talking to Neil Stratton of Inside the League. He's got his finger on the pulse when it comes to the industry insider news. He does the best job there is out there, period. So, Neil, we had Russell Landy on the other day, and he said that, back in February, combine time, he was hearing a lot of rumblings about front office shakeups, executives who could be fired, scouts on the move. Obviously, with the COVID hit kicking in right after that, we didn't see a lot of turnover this past draft cycle. He said he is anticipating a slew of turnover in front offices around the league. Is that along the lines of what you're hearing, or what are you anticipating there?
I anticipate this to be a bloodbath. And here's one thing I think that a lot of people aren't considering. I think, number one, almost everyone who was a scout last year that might have been on the fence about getting elected, they got another year on their contract. Usually you've got a 2-year deal. That's pretty standard. The other thing is, we don't know how Zoom's going to affect how people think about evaluation. There's so much information that's being gathered now without having to leave the office. These teams are used to sending out staffs of 5 to 10 people across the nation and, going out driving, flying, whatever, and canvassing everything, really looking at all these teams very comprehensively. How is that going to happen? I mean, how is that going to change now that they know that they can just have someone sit on Zoom and get a lot of the background information? Not as good, but a lot cheaper. And for whatever reason, and John, I think you know this, whenever teams want to make cuts to they feel like they're not making as much money or whatever, they go to the scout room. They want to get rid of those guys first. I don't know why that is. They have, your scouting room is your R&D department of your company. You would think that those would be most valuable employees, but that's not the mindset, I think, in today's modern NFL. So I expect there's going to be a lot of turnover. If you're a young person trying to get into scouting right now, now's a great time for you. If you're a guy that kind of looks like me, a little bit of patches of gray hair, and you're not on the GM track, I'd be really updating my resume right now and making sure I'm networking like crazy, because there could be a lot of jobs lost in the next 6 months, I guess.
Right, and I think you made it at a very direct point, which is the NFL, more than any Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 company, spends less in research and development percentage of the money earned made by the teams, by the league, and every time in each decade you've seen them move it back, move it back, move it back, move it back. Same thing, unfortunately, is followed in how the XFL has done things multiple times, how the CFL has trended, in terms of things, hoping that, the players will always make themselves available. Well, that's not a great, way to do business. That's not a great way to say that you can do some of those things. But I would wonder, the further you push that back in that direction, does it guarantee that Kurt Warner then gets found? Right? Does it guarantee that mid or late round, the player that got selected by the right team in the right process with the right situation, does it guarantee that everything would play out exactly the same way, to say, if you keep changing this element and you don't add anything into it, right? Okay, so you change some of the coaching analytics to change out and give coaches more of a spreadsheet or more of a kind of a rules play to follow, right? And we see that baseball at times looks like a whole different game than what we've seen 20 years ago, and it looks completely automated to where this guy bats, this guy's in the pit, this guy bats, this guy pitches, and it looks completely different, right? I've never seen a baseball playoff series where both teams do not know who's starting game 3 and game 4, and they're just saying, well, we'll just use whoever we got. That's something you never would have seen, in pro sports 10 or 15, 20 years ago. So are you really willing to go down that track? And if you do, now, for all of us, makes me wonder, were we just a little too early, right? Because now what you and I have done, and I and Rick have done in different elements, now becomes really, really important, because it could be instead of a third party or an independent, used network. It could be something that teams start buying into, almost creating their own network of wanting their own Ric Serritella, their own Neil Stratton, their own person doing the same exact kind of research and analytics on the draft and player personnel that they've done on the coaching side. Because if you're looking for a cheap formula, well, then it better have some backdoor office to it. And to me, that's where you lose your stuff. You can send a new guy on the road, a former player, a young guy out of college or things like that. But what you don't get, the trust and the built-in relationships and the information to be like, oh, hey, by the way, you're here at South Dakota State. If I were you, I'd drive down the road to this NAIA school. They got this kid that we were recruiting. Or, hey, by the way, Houston Baptist has a guy. You might want to take a trip over there. You don't get that if they don't know who you are. You don't get that if you don't have those built-in relationships. So to me, that's the part of the business that's getting lost, has been getting lost for the last 10 years, will further get lost if teams keep buying into the idea that, hey, just hire a GM and then put all these other people around them. I've said, to me, that's the number one most important part of who you see the Texans hire as the GM. If you know that person's strengths is who he's bringing with him, they can have success. Because if you're paying a quarterback what you're paying him, and a left tackle, and some of the other contracts they're left with, you better have a hell of a pro personnel department to find a CFL guy, a Canadian guy, somebody else hiding under a global, symbol. And you better have some really good scouts to find mid-round guys who can start, late-round guys that can dress, and undrafted free agents who make your roster. Because if not, you're not going to survive with a $40 million quarterback and some of the other contracts they have.
Yeah, now that Deshaun is no longer on his rookie deal, it really puts the pressure on the scouting department. And I've had conversations with those guys, and I'm sure you have too, John and Rick. They knew after they paid Deshaun Watson that they were going to have to, do things a little differently. And you also alluded to the pro department, John. It's such an undersung part in evaluation. You've got to be able to find those guys in week 10 when your left tackle goes down or your outside linebacker or whatever that are, kind of laying around out there that are kind of under the rock, so to speak. And, that's definitely true. And firing Bill O'Brien doesn't solve all those problems. They're going to have to continue to do all that no matter what GM they bring in. So, it's all part of the process of the hiring and evaluation. Flying all that stuff is fascinating. And I think, again, kind of tells you what the future is going to look like for franchises. And that's why we follow all this stuff.
Yeah, people don't realize a big part of the scouting process is not necessarily your eye for talent or what you know. A lot of it does come down to who you know and those personal relationships. And you just heard Rick Gosselin
no doubt about
a minute ago. He was on saying, hey, I couldn't watch film and tell you who to pick, but you know what? I spoke to just about every team and ran down the big board, so I had a pretty good idea of how the board was going to shake out. So a lot of it is who you know. A lot of it is going into the schools and like I go to certain schools, I know who I can trust. I know who's feeding me a line of BS. And, when you're on a group type of Zoom call, you lose that personal element. Also, just the eye test. We were talking about it with Dane Vandernat the other day with the NFL PA ball. It's like, man, we're just really missing going to the schools and seeing these guys up close, in person, on field. It just carries so much weight. It's little things that you see. But Neil, we're running out of time here. I know you're on the move. One last question. I'm going to roll it into an outro. So we get a lot of agents that watch the show hanging out in the chat room, a lot of aspiring agents. I get asked a lot, what is the status with the agent exam? And Inside the League does as good a job as anybody for the agent prep for guys that want to take that exam. I'm hearing that there could be some kind of online course in November. What are you hearing? And then also tell the good people at home again one more time where to find all your stuff and what's on tap.
Well, for everyone who's interested in the agent business, obviously, everyone can go on. The exam is in the summer, typically in July. That's been postponed a couple times due to the impacts of the coronavirus. I don't know. I don't have any new information, Rick. Your information may be better than mine. I keep thinking that if they were going to put it online, they would have done it a lot sooner. At this point, even if they do put it online, the first year is going to be a wash, because if it takes about 6 weeks to get results back, as it usually does, that puts you into first week of January, really, before you even know what your results are, presuming they have the test around Thanksgiving. That means your recruiting for 2021 is shot, and I don't even know if it's worth it at this point. To me, I think they're better off just rolling it into next year and then hoping for the best, and really maybe kind of streamline this online process. I think at the end of the day, that's what we're all comfortable with now, and we all know how to Zoom. We all know how to do all these things. Why not just wait till next year? I'm hopeful that it'd be great if they have it this year, but it's really going to be a detriment to this rookie class of agents.
No doubt. Well, hey, we appreciate the time here today, Neil. I'll be looking out for that inbox delivery tomorrow, and of course, InsideTheLeague.com, Succeed in Football blog, and enjoy your family trip, your college visit out there. Tell Polly and the family we said hello.
Hey, thanks so much, guys. Rick, John, y'all have a great weekend. Appreciate y'all having me on.
You too, brother. That's Neil Stratton, Inside the League, good friend of the show, even better person, and someone who is well connected, as is my guy John Murphy, here each and every day, weekdays, 9 a.m. Eastern, on the State of Football. John, it's been another hour of power winding down. Of course, the big news, the Falcons releasing a statement with the Adam Schefter ESPN report that 4 members of the organization test positive for COVID. Not all of those tests have been confirmed. So the Falcons facility has now shut down. According to multiple reports, the person who tested positive is not a player. So the NFL has not yet made a decision on the upcoming game against the Vikings on Sunday.
Yeah, so I mean, if this is the starting point of seeing how, like I said, what the Titans did, in terms of you get somebody that tests positive, you immediately go to guns here, shut everything down. They have had Marlon Davidson and I think AJ Terrell, at some point have both, had some issues, with it. But if you jump on it early, there's a chance that, it doesn't affect everybody. Everyone else in the organization is tested again today. You clear that out. Whoever's office it is gets cleared, and then you're able to keep things going, because if not, this game's going to jump from Sunday to Tuesday quick, because you're already playing a doubleheader. So unless we're going to see, a heck of a Monday, 1 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 7 o'clock, type of situation, which you would think that's not what the NFL would want, in that scenario. And the other thing is, if you start delving into later days in the week next week, you're going to end up playing NFL games versus potentially World Series games. And that's something that no party wants really a part of from a television, kind of standpoint. So you wish for the best. You hope whoever got it, it's not too severe. And even if it's not a player, you certainly don't want a staff member who's probably around everybody a lot, to be affected by this, but in terms of things, here's the Vikings again, right? The Vikings came off of having to be worried about it when it came to the Titans, who they had just played. And now they have to prepare for the Falcons as if you're playing on Sunday. And if you're not, and then you're playing on Tuesday, you're kind of having to change some things around, with your, methods in terms of leading up to the game. And the other thing you always have to worry about with this is the travel is totally different for road games right now. So if you're changing the game, you can't wait kind of past tomorrow to make that decision, because the Vikings would be headed, to Atlanta in this scenario on Saturday. So, we'll see what we get. But like I said, there's still plenty enough time, to get things sorted out there and not play, and to play, excuse me. But if not, like I said, you'll be jumping this game in all likelihood, from Sunday right to playing it on Tuesday, because like I said, Atlanta would have to know that they're clear and can travel and get out to Minnesota, and Minnesota would have to know that the opposing team coming in to play them does not have any issues once they arrive. So it's still kind of a few more steps in the direction, before we have to worry about things. But just one more thing for the Falcons, right? You're changing coaches. You want to have the most time you can that week, in order to change a few things and work on a few things. They also changed out their special teams coach, so a very interesting week for Bernie Parmalee, former Miami Dolphins running back, who's now going to be the special teams coordinator the rest of the way. So that's a lot to juggle, when you're also now having to deal with some COVID stuff. But it is something, you've seen it with the Titans. And if Raheem Morris, who's known as a player's coach, and Parmalee's a former player, Jeff Ulbrich, who's their now defensive coordinator, another former player, all in the room, that can kind of give you a little gel, right? We're 0-5. Everybody's saying, what does this matter? None of these games matter. Well, it matters for 11 weeks that somebody's getting to be a head coach again, right? It matters, to Parmalee for his career. It matters to Ulbrich, as being a guy calling a defense for the next 11 weeks. And I think if you can get to the message, it's harder with the Julio Jones. I'm not saying it's harder, but it's harder to say that to a Julio Jones who knows the next 11 weeks are not identifying their career. But for a lot of guys in that room, the next 11 weeks will identify who you are, because that film is going to get shown to all 31 other teams. And they're going to get to see the effort, the performance, and how you're improving as a football player. And what are you doing when your back is against the wall? Because you don't ever really want to be in that 0-5 scenario. But what it can show other teams is your ability and willingness to adapt and move forward and play good football, which is something that will capture some other team's eye, some other coach, some other scout who's watching you. They'll notice that even if the Falcons don't retain you, is how you're playing in these games, because you might think these are layups, but there's a huge difference between going 500 the rest of the way and making it turn out to be, wow, 6-11. Wow, weren't they 0-5? As opposed to going 2-14 and people start questioning, what kind of guys you had on your team. Because it's very easy to start tempering down,
Sure.
especially with everything going on right now. So it'll be really interesting to see how the Falcons play out the rest of this year.
If you play well the next week or two, you might even find, play yourself out into a contender and get dealt. So I think Raheem Morris and the boys are going to, kind of have a Dan Campbell effect, at least initially. I think I could see some rejuvenation. Now, if he can do it for the whole season, it's hard. It's hard because I do think some veterans will get dealt here. And so it'll be hard to win the ball games. But Tuesday Night Football, that might be a new thing. We'll come back tomorrow to discuss it. Oh, by the way, Nick Saban, I heard he tested positive for COVID. We didn't even get a chance to discuss that here on today's show. It was just a jam-packed hour. Big shout-out to all of our guests, Neil Stratton from Inside the League, Rick Gosselin from the Talk of Fame, and, of course, the breaking news early in the episode with John Murphy delivering on the Le'Veon Bell situation. Kansas City Chiefs at the forefront. Tampa Bay, Miami, maybe also in the mix. We'll come back at it again tomorrow to break it all down. We'll have Big Law, Lawrence Johnson of Seven Cities Shop Talk. We might even have a guest appearance from David Turner. Don't forget our NFL Draft Tailgate Show on Saturday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern. And go get the virtual draft guide now, available at NFLDraftBible.com. You will get a free copy of Neil Stratton's book, Scout Speak. And we are donating 50% of sales this week to the Red Cross Hurricane Delta Relief Fund. For John Murphy, I'm Ric Serritella. We'll catch you tomorrow, everybody.